As Mattia said, thank you, Mattia, for the introduction. A visit to Antarctica was a bucket list item for me. And with climate change occurring, it got moved up on the list. When the University of Toronto Alumni Association offered a tour at a reasonable price for 2 weeks in February this year, we decided to go. So we flew from Toronto to Buenos Aires and then on to Ushuaia, which is where the red dot is at the tip of South America, the bottom of Argentina on the Beagle Channel. The cruise would then sail across the 1,100 kilometers of the Drake Strait, and we'd go down the western coast of the Antarctic Peninsula. So while in Ushuaia, they gave us a tour of the area, and this included the terminus of the Pan American Highway, which is the world's longest road at 17,848 kilometers from Prudhoe Bay in Alaska all the way down to Ushuaia. And the two motorcycles in the picture actually belong to a couple of young Spaniards who had just completed the trip from Alaska. Another stop on this tour was the post office at the end of the world. It's just a small building at the end of a pier on the Beagle Channel. It's the most southerly post office in Argentina, and that's a shot of the front door. It's not very big. The land on the other side of the Beagle Channel is Chile, but it's mostly uninhabited. And there's the Argentine postal sign over the front door. So with a busload of tourists, here's the Postmaster Carlos checking the rate on my postcard. And we weren't the only busload of tourists there. The line went out the door. And as people were scribbling their postcards to send home, the Postmaster Carlos simply checks your mail to determine the rate and collects the money. The stamps are attached after the crowd leaves at the end of the day. He just had a pile of postcards over on the side that he would deal with at the end of the day. So here's the postcard that I sent from the end of the world. 275 or 265 Argentine pesos at 2 cents each is about $5 Canadian. Oops, how do I go back? And it took about 4 weeks from the time I mailed it until it came back to Toronto. And now the cruise begins. With a 2-day crossing of the Drake Strait, the stretch of water between the South American continent and the South Shetland Islands of Antarctica is considered the roughest in the world, but we were lucky. The waves on our southern transit were 1 to 3 meters, a relatively smooth sailing. And having lunch with a friend about a month before we left, he told me of his experience the year before. By reaching the Drake, the waves were 15 meters high. That's about 4 stories. At the beginning of the crossing, 2 individuals were injured on a stairwell, and the injuries were so severe they couldn't be dealt with properly on board, and they needed to return to Ushuaia. The delay meant they would not have sufficient time to sail to Antarctica and back. And besides, the captain said there was a more severe storm moving in. So instead, he had an exciting trip to the Falkland Islands, which he was not impressed with. So let's see if I get this started here. This is just a short video of the wave action in the Drake Strait on a calm day off the side of the ship. Calm day on the Drake Strait. Oops. Okay, so just south of the, after passing the South Shetland Islands, we came upon this iceberg. And the crew estimated this one at 50 meters high and about 1 kilometer wide. It would weigh in at about 1.3 million tons. And remember, 80% of this is below water. So here we are passing it. He wasn't playing Titanic. We managed to miss it. But we did get close enough to get a good look at this piece of ice. And the sight of large iceberg would become a common occurrence on the trip. We saw an awful lot of icebergs. And one of the things we found out about icebergs is they actually roll, because they melt faster on the bottom than the top, and the center of gravity changes, so they actually roll, and you have to be careful if you're in small zodiacs that you don't get too near them. In order to avoid carrying any invasive species onto the continent of Antarctica, we were required to wash our boots before getting into the zodiacs each time. And on returning to the ship, we also had to wash our boots in order to get the penguin poo off. On one of the crossing days, everybody was required to vacuum their outerwear to ensure there were no seeds or other foreign matter still attached, so we wouldn't carry any invasive species into Antarctica. They're very, very cautious about what goes on, and nothing comes off. Under the Antarctic Treaty, more than 100 people can be on shore at any time. Our ship had 10 Zodiacs, which carried 10 people plus the drivers. And all the landings in Antarctica are by Zodiac, and they're usually a wet landing. We were told ships carrying more than 200 people are not allowed to land in Antarctica. We had 10 Canadians on our ship and about 160 Americans. Our first stop in Antarctica would be Port Lockroy. It's Antarctica's most popular tourist destination and a unique British post office located in the heart of the Antarctic Peninsula. It was established in 1944 as a British research station, but since 2006, it's now a museum, gift shop, and post office run by the UK Antarctica Heritage Trust. Even before COVID-19, only 12 people were allowed inside at one time. And with 100 people on shore, we were asked to write our postcards on board ship and give them to guest services who would deliver them to the post office. This saved everybody from lining up, as we had a little over an hour on shore. There's approximately 18,000 annual visitors to this post office museum, and they handle about 80,000 pieces of mail. And that's only in the 4 months they're open, from mid-November to about early March. So what happens to a piece of mail that's deposited at the Penguin post office box? Sending a postcard costs $1 US, no matter the destination. The team frank the mail by hand, and on a busy day, there can be more than 1,000 postcards. It's then bundled, weighed, and almost 500 kilograms of mail is processed by the team each season, bagged and transported to the Falklands by an expedition ship, weather and ice permitting. Every postcard has quite a journey before reaching its final destination. Once the bagged mail reaches the Falklands, the Stanley Post Office puts it on the weekly Royal Air Force plane to the UK, where it finally enters regular postal service. The fastest a postcard can travel from Port Lockroy to Cambridge is just over 2 weeks. It often takes longer, as the mail may not leave Antarctica for a week or two after it's dropped in the box. What's more, at the end of the season, no ships return to the Falklands, so if you visit Port Lockroy after mid-February, your mail will most likely overwinter in Antarctica. So that's a shot inside the post office. I'm on one wall, and you can see it's not a very big building. They do sell first day covers of previous British Antarctica Territory issues and some presentation sets, along with t-shirts and a number of other touristy things you may like. So here's my cover that I mailed. The postage is 2 airmail postcard stamps from the British Antarctic Territory, about $2.50 Canadian, but the ship charged me €5. There was no additional franking or postmarks from its long voyage, and again, it took about 4 weeks to make it to Toronto. The cachet on the cover is a copy of the patch the tour company gave us for the trip. I apologize for not offering to take covers for club members to be mailed. Our luggage limit for the flight to and from Ushuaia was only 15 kilograms, and I did want to take some clothes for the cruise. So there's another shot of the cover and the stamps. The museum had a number of philatelic items as displays. Here was the first set of stamps to be issued on February 12, 1944 from Port Lockroy. The Falkland Island stamps overprinted with Graham Land Dependency of. Graham Land was the name of this part of the Antarctic Peninsula, which formed part of the Falkland Island dependencies. The stamps were used from 1944 to 1946. Other Falkland Island dependencies were the South Shetland Islands, the South Orkney Islands, and South Georgia. So from my collection, these are the overprints of the other Falkland Island dependency, the South Shetland Islands on the top and the South Georgia Island down below. And these are the South Orkney overprints. So this is a copy of a cover showing those stamps. It's not a first day cover. The first mail was stamped aboard a ship in Port Lockroy with the overprinted stamps for grams. And the postmark on this is December the 9th, 1944. So these are the Falkland Island Dependence stamps, which were released July the 12th, 1946, for use at the various bases in the Falkland Island dependencies, including Port Lockroy. These replaced the 1944 overprinted stamps. And these stamps were used until 1963. This was an interesting exhibit. It says, philatelists are keen to get mail from this remote post office. An entry in the base diary reads, the relative politeness of American and English stamp collectors afforded considerable interest, the former winning hands down. Americans more polite than British? Interesting. Even the Falkland Island dependencies participated in numerous omnibus issues of the British Empire. Here's the Universal Postal Anniversary stamps that were issued by a number of countries. Now here's a map showing the red dot is Port Lockroy. That's where the post office is. And you can see just to the north of that, the South Shetland Islands. In 1959, the Antarctic Treaty was signed and it became effective in 1961. It covers all the land and ice shelves south of 60 degrees. So in 1963, the British Antarctic Territory was formed. It included Port Lockroy and the South Shetland Islands and the South Orkney Islands. And since then, they've used the stamps of the British Antarctica Territory. South Shetland Islands are 120 kilometers north of the peninsula, and about 500 people live in 3,600 square kilometers. Fishing is their main industry. The South Orkney Islands, off to the east, are 604 kilometers northeast of the peninsula. They have an area of 630 square kilometers and a population of 55 in the summer and 14 in the winter. Other than the staff at the research station, there are no permanent residents. A further 844 kilometers northeast of the South Orkney Islands is South Georgia. It's north of 60 degrees south. It's 55 degrees south, 33 degrees west. So along with the South Sandwich Islands, it does not form part of the British Antarctic Territory. There's about 30 staff at a research station, and again, no permanent residents. From 1963 to 1979, it had its own stamp simply marked South Georgia. From 1980 to 1985, it again used the stamps of the Falkland Island dependencies. And from 1986 on, the stamps are inscribed South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands. Sale of stamps to collectors is a large source of revenue from abroad for the islands. We experienced wonderful weather during our week. Generally, Antarctica gets 6 sunny days a season. That's mid-November to early March. In the 5 days we were down there, we had 3 sunny days. There are 10 scheduled excursions on the cruise. They're all weather dependent. The norm is you get 6 to 8. We got all 10, and because of our smooth southern transit of the Drake, we arrived early enough to get a bonus excursion. I just found pictures don't do justice to the landscape. The vastness cannot be captured in a single photo. Many times when I was on deck, I just left my camera in my pocket and I just enjoyed the ride. Chances are that nobody has walked on the mountains we're looking at. All the cruises land at designated sites, and the treaty only permits 1 ship at a site at a time, and there's 2 landings at each site each day. It's all very well orchestrated. We saw a few other ships, but basically you see nobody. Here's a shot of the moon rising, and somebody with a little more patience than me managed to get a shot of the moon sitting on the peak, so it looked like a golf ball up on a tee. Under the treaty, you're required to stay 15 meters from all land wildlife. The naturalists will mark the areas we can walk in prior to us landing, but the penguins did not obey the rules. There's a lot of penguins, as it was molting season. And while on land molting, they do not eat. So that we were given specific instructions not to stress them, because they will go out to the water, they'll feed, then they'll come on land, and they stay on land for about 6 weeks while they're molting. And they don't eat during that time frame, and they don't move very much either. So these are Gen 2 penguins. We also saw seals, including this leopard seal resting on an ice floe. And the seals were also molting. We saw lots of seals. And some camerats, number of birds. And there are many old whaling stations on the Arctic Peninsula. The bones were just left where they cut up the whale. Although we did see a number of humpback whales swim along the side of our ship. In fact, one night while we were having dinner at a window, a mother and its calf were swimming alongside right outside the window where we were dining. So it was quite an experience. We returned to the Drake, and very fortunately, our northbound sailing was even calmer than our southern sail. We made it back in 36 hours instead of the normal 48. And as a bonus, the captain sailed us around Cape Horn. You may remember from your public school history how the ancient mariners feared this strait of water. The area is littered with many shipwrecks. And as I was on the bridge speaking with one of the officers, and I mentioned to him that this must be very unusual weather for the Cape. And he replied to me that this was the first time in 2 years they've been able to do this. My wife commented that we benefited because the captain had his son on board for the cruise. And I'll finish with one last penguin shot, this time of what you call a chin strap penguin for obvious reasons. So thank you very much for that.